Payroll deductions represent amounts withheld from an employee's paycheck for things other than taxes, things such as health insurance, retirement plan, and even garnishments. Benefits represent those things paid by the employer on behalf of the employee. It could be the employer's contribution to the employee's retirement plan or the employer's portion of health insurance or any other benefit. Both the deductions and the benefits are maintained on a list underneath Setup, Payroll Details, and Deductions and Benefits. If you created your database using the new database wizard, you're going to wind up with a similar list of deductions and benefits to the one that you see here. So CenterPoint provides a sample of these different deductions and benefits. You will likely need to make some changes to them, and you'll understand those changes as we go through the list. So to edit an existing deduction and benefit, you can just highlight it and click Edit and then make whatever changes you need to. Okay. If you wanted to, you could start with one of our deductions and benefits and create a brand new one by just simply clicking that you want to copy it, and then it would allow you to put in a new abbreviation and name and make any changes you wanted to that deduction and benefit. You can also delete from this list. If there's something on the list that you know that you're not going to need, you could either leave it here and it really won't get in the way anyplace else, but if you prefer to have a non-cluttered list, you can go ahead and highlight it and click delete, and then you'll be able to remove it as long as it's not attached to the employer record or any employee's records. If it is, you'll have to remove it from those records first, or you might just be able to make it inactive. To make a deduction and benefit inactive, you can double click on it to edit it, and then there is an active box on the inside where you can just take the check mark out and inactivate it here. Okay, I'm going to create a new one by going ahead and clicking on New. So we're going to create one from scratch. Each deduction and or benefit needs to have an abbreviation for it. So I'm going to go ahead and call this Best Health. Okay, the name of it is our Best Health Insurance. And this is a pre-tax one, so I'm going to go ahead and put pre-tax in there. That's just helpful for me if I have more than one plan to know that this one is the pre-tax one. After you go ahead and give it a name, you're going to select what type it is. And we have many different types of deductions and benefits, and the type will help determine some other ways this particular item functions. It will determine what employer and employee methods there are for calculating it, and it will also determine how taxes are handled. So we have a retirement plan, non-taxable, retirement plan taxable, cafeteria plan for any of those non-taxable insurance plans, insurance plan taxable, garnishments, other taxable deduction benefits, other non-taxable deductions benefit, payroll advance repayment, and so on. So there are many different types here. To learn more about these different types, you'll want to view the video more about payroll deductions and benefits. Right now, we're going to focus on just creating one deduction and benefit. So the one that we're creating is a pre-tax insurance plan. We're going to select cafeteria plan. Okay, we'll show you in a minute how this affects the taxes tab, but I want to finish filling out the top part of this deduction and benefit first. Okay, over on the right-hand side, after I select the type, I'm going to choose who the contributor is. If it say both, then it is both a deduction and it's a benefit. If I say that it's the employer only, it grays out the employee side of things. So this whole left side that's employee detail is grayed out, and it'll be just a benefit then. If I choose that it's an employee only, it'll gray out the employer items, including the expense account, and then it'll be just an employee deduction. This particular one for me is both. Okay, if it is an employee deduction or a benefit, you are going to have to choose a liability account. Now, that liability account needs to be a liability. It doesn't need to be, but it's most often a liability account in the category of payroll liabilities under the type of liabilities. Okay, I'm going to right click on this. I've already selected the account there. I'm going to right click on it and edit it. You can see here that it is the type of a liability in the category of payroll liabilities. When you create an account in this category on the detail tab, we're going to ask you to select from your list of vendors the vendor that this particular deduction is paid to. So usually we have one account per vendor that needs to be paid. Right, so in this case, it's Best Health Insurance. If I need to change that to a different vendor, I can, or I can create a new vendor by clicking on the new button there. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and select that vendor. Now, if you create that liability in any other category other than that, so if you create it in other liabilities, for example, then it won't create invoices. So if it's in the category of payroll liabilities, it's going to create invoices to that vendor when the payroll is posted for those items, either the deductions or the benefits that were calculated. If you don't want it to post invoices to that vendor, you can put it underneath the category of other liabilities. There may be some tax issues for those of you who file cash taxes if you do use that method. Okay, if it is an employer benefit, you're going to select the expense account that goes to. So I have one here called benefits expense. Okay, so this expense account is creating a default for when you assign this to any new employees. It can be overridden on an employee by employee basis. So right on the employee record, we're going to be able to override that, and we'll see that in just a few minutes here. Okay, at this point, I'm going to come back to the information at the bottom here, the employee and employer detail. And I had previously talked about the type and how it affects the taxes tab. So I'm going to go over to the taxes tab. This one that we selected cafeteria plan, which means that it's pre-tax. And in that pre-tax, it means that none of these taxes are going to be calculated until this deduction is removed from the employee's gross pay. So it will be calculated as gross pay minus this deduction, and then the taxes will be calculated. Okay, so those taxes being on the right means that they're not going to be calculated until after the deduction is taken out. If they were on the left-hand side like that, it would mean that they were calculated on the employee's gross pay. Okay, or if there's another deduction that's pre-tax, it would have those pre-tax items come out first. Okay, but this particular deduction isn't going to affect how those taxes are calculated. Okay, I'm going to move them back over to the right because that's where they belong on this particular deduction. We also have similar settings for the employer. There may be some employer benefit that the employee needs to pay taxes on. So if this was a benefit that you also needed to calculate federal withholding on, federal withholding would be calculated on their gross wage plus this benefit, and then it would calculate the federal withholding. Okay, so that's not typical. Many times, most times you won't have a situation where the employee or benefit is creating an additional tax for the employee. Okay, but it is available if you need it. I'm going to go back to the General tab. Okay, after we've selected all of the items up at the top, we're going to have either an employer side or an employee side or an employer side, or both. That's determined by the contributor. Okay, for the employee deduction portion, if that deduction amount needs to show on your W-2 anywhere, there is a box here for you to select what box and code it belongs in on the W-2. Okay, this one, if it doesn't, I can leave it blank. Then you're going to select your employee method. The employee methods for this particular type of deduction are as follows: fixed amount, hourly rate all hours, hourly rate just on regular hours, payroll advance fixed amount, a percent of gross wages, percent of net wages. Okay, so you're going to choose the amount that is, or the method that is appropriate for your deduction. We're going to choose fixed amount, and then you're going to choose the schedule. Okay, every deduction and benefit is going to default to this schedule, which means that it is going to get calculated on every pay period unless the pay period is selected as no deductions and benefits. Okay, but other than that, it's going to be selected on every pay period. There is the ability to have different schedules. Like, for example, if you have a health insurance that's taken out on the first and the second pay period of the month, but not the third, you would want to create a schedule for the second, first, and second pay period only. Okay, you can create new schedules by clicking on the new button here on the lookup. Otherwise, everything will default to this monthly option. Okay, as far as the rate goes, I usually don't put any rates in here where we create the deduction and benefit. We usually wait until this gets assigned to the employee to put in a rate, because every employee's rate might be different. If we do put in a rate here, it just becomes a default for when you create new employees. Okay, on the right-hand side is the employer detail. Again, if the benefit portion needs to be on the W-2, you're going to select which box and code represents that on the W-2. Then you're going to choose what method can be used for the employer. So we have lots of different methods available. In this case, it is still a fixed amount. Okay, some of those different methods are discussed in the video for that talks about more about payroll deductions and benefits. Again, I'd probably leave the rate as 0, and I would most likely, I'm matching my schedule for the benefit to the schedule for the deduction, but they can be on different schedules. Okay. Then we're going to go to the Limits tab. The Limits tab allows you to set limits on a deduction and benefit. Let's say that let's just pretend that this one is a retirement plan and the employee is contributing 3%, or it is a retirement plan in which the employee might be some sort of percentage. Well, he might say, well, even though it's a percentage, I don't want to contribute more than $350 per month. And maybe I also don't want to contribute any more than $8,500 for the whole year. So we can have a single or combined limits on a deduction. We can also have single or combined limits on benefits. Okay, so an employer may limit how much he's contributing. Let's say on a 401k plan, the employer is matching the employee deduction, but only up to $5,000 annually. You would put in an annual limit. For both of those, you can tell the system how you want to handle things when the limit, I'm sorry, that's not for that limit up at the top. For both the employee deduction and the employer benefit, you can tell the system whether there is a non-taxable limit. If there is a non-taxable limit, you can tell us what that non-taxable amount is. Again, setting a limit here is just going to be a default. We can actually override that limit on each employee. For example, with health insurance, or with retirement plans, there usually is a non-taxable limit, but they usually have a different limit for those people that are over the age of 50. So it can be overridden on those employees' records. Then you're going to tell, after you put in if you have a non-taxable limit, after you put in what the non-taxable limit amount is, you can tell the system whether you're going to stop the deduction when the limit is reached, continue the deduction, but it no longer is non-taxable, or you can say that its limit is a combined stop when both the employee and the employer limits are reached. Okay. Likewise, down at the bottom, talking about those combined limits, sometimes you have a limit, another deduction or benefit that you have to consider for a limit. So we can combine different contributions to reach a limit. Okay, and mark one of them as a primary. So after, and I'm going to take that check mark out because I don't have any limits on this particular deduction. After you've determined the limits for the deductions and benefits, you can go over to the Earnings tab. We already talked about the Taxes tab. Well, actually, I talked about the Taxes tab. Yeah, I did. I talked about it all the way. So we're going to go over to the Earnings tab. On the Earnings tab, you're going to tell the system what earnings you're going to calculate this deduction on. So for example, I don't want to deduct health insurance out of reimbursement. I don't want to deduct health insurance out of a payroll advance. I might not want to deduct health insurance out of a bonus or a commission check. Okay, so those items that that insurance should not be calculated on should be moved over to the right-hand side. When you're done, you can go ahead and click Save. At the time you hit Save, it'll ask you whether or not you want to add this to employees. If you say no, then you'll have to add it to employees a different way. And I'll show you a couple different ways that it can be added. If you say yes, then what'll happen, and this came up on another monitor for me, so I'm going to just drag it over to this monitor. What'll happen is it'll bring up a list of your employees, and you could select which employees you want to add it to by moving them over to the right. So I'm just going to move one over right now. I highlighted him and I hit the arrow key to move him over to the right. Double clicking on the employee will also move it to the right. And then I'm just going to click Add, and it's going to just make me verify that I want to add it to this employee, and I'm going to say yes. Now it's automatically added to the employer record. It only asks you if you want to add it to the employee record. Okay, another way to add it to an employee records, if I'm sitting here on this list of deductions and benefits under Setup and Payroll and Deductions and Benefits, I can right click on a deduction and benefit and choose the option to add it to employees. Once again, that came up on another monitor for me, but this time it brings up a list of all employees that don't already have this deduction and benefit. So previously I had assigned it to Sam Apple, so you see Sam Apple isn't on the list. So I could also add it to an employee this way. So now I'm going to add it to Ted Maple. Okay, so it goes ahead and just verifies and lets me know that it was added to one employee. Okay, now as I stated, it adds it automatically to the employer record. But if you had modified a deduction and benefit that was already there, instead of creating a new one, you might need to manually add it to the employer. To do that, you would go to Setup, Payroll Details, and Employers. You would edit the employer and then go to his Deductions and Benefits tab. And as you're highlighted on Deductions and Benefits up at the top down below, you're going to see a list of deductions and benefits. So to add one to that employer, all you have to do is put a check mark in it. And you notice that Best Health Insurance is already checked. Once it's checked, it becomes a level on this tree of all these different deductions and benefits. And on that tree, you can go ahead and override or change any of the details, such as which liability account it's going to, or what expense account. And if you had put any rates in there, you can also change the rates. Okay, anything you set at the employer level does not change it on the employees. It only changes it for any new employee that you create. And so that's the employer level. You can, once it's assigned to the employer, whether that was done through saving it as a new one or manually adding it like I just showed you, you can add it to employees by going to Setup and Employees. So an additional way to add it to an employee, I'm going to add it to Geraldine Oak here, is to edit the employee and then go to the Deductions and Benefits tab. And then down below, you'll see all of the different deductions and benefits that you have for this employer. And to add it to an employee, all you have to do is check the box next to it. What'll happen is it'll build a tree over here on the right-hand side. Now, one thing is, while I'm highlighted on the employer at the very top, you'll notice on the right, and this is for garnishments only, where if you have multiple garnishments, they can say you can put in a limit total of all garnishments from that person's net income. So sometimes you have an order written saying that they have to meet a minimum income amount. Okay, as far as the, so I added the best health by putting the check mark in it. And as I highlight each level of it, you'll see here first off that it gives you the opportunity to give it a different name. So you can give it an alternate name here. And then you can tell the system the specific employee details, such as the employee rate. So let's say that the employee rate's $125. Okay, I can also override the schedule if I needed to choose a different schedule. On the employer's side of things, not only can we put in the employer rate, so I'm going to say that the employer rate is $285, we can also override the expense account that it's going to and choose a different expense account. And that's helpful when you have employees whose payroll expenses are being sent to different expense accounts. And then I'm just going to click save, and now it is added to that employee.